Hi, Leslie. Thank you so much for stopping by the DMA and Then booth. Tell us a little bit about why you came to the conference and what you have gotten out of it maybe so far.
Okay. I'm Leslie Price. I'm a senior product manager at Acxiom. Acxiom is a large data compiler and data provider to marketers around the world. My projects that I specialize in are email data, phone data, and where our enhancement data bridges the gap and it's being offered in a digital world. And the reason I'm here today is actually on behalf of the DMA and the IAB to participate in the new data label transparency initiative.
Okay.
And so that's what brought me here, is just to talk to people about it and see their reactions as they've gone through some of the different sessions.
You're in a really interesting industry and time, and I know a lot of the attendees have talked about GDPR. What do you think are the things that marketers need to think about the most from a GDPR perspective?
Well, there's GDPR, which probably affects most people, but not as heavily, and then there's the new California Privacy Protection Act, CCPA, and that comes up and it goes into effect in July of 2020. So that's also really important, and it tags along onto GDPR, and while there's a lot of overlaps, there's a lot of nuances to it as well. And anybody who was following that particular new law, knew that it was in reaction, a very quick knee-jerk reaction to a ballot initiative that was incredibly restrictive, particularly to data providers. When you looked at that ballot initiative and what was being asked of data providers, it was just immensely expensive from an infrastructure, from a system, and from a people resource perspective. It would have been very, very difficult to comply, to the point that companies may have made the decision and at least run the analysis, do I get out of California? So that's really very critical in today's world, and you already see states stepping up. New Jersey's announced that they're going to have something like that on the ballot. And now we have the federal initiatives where the federal government is talking about intervention. And all that plays against the direct marketing industry, which has always been very self-regulated and has been very good at being self-regulated. So that's where the data label, I think, is really critical, because we have this grassroots consumer awareness of their data, though I think they're still kind of naive about how it's used. They're still very nascent in how it's used. But you have that consumer grassroots movement that's driving the politics, that's driving the state and the federal. We've got GDPR that's made a big splash around the world. And it's really, now's the time, if we're still going to maintain some level of self-regulatory initiatives, now's a really good time to step in and do that. And that's why the data label is so important.
Are there other kind of outreach things that you think the industry needs to be doing to get in front of this before it kind of snowballs into something that nobody really wants?
I think responsible use of data is always very important. And whenever I look at regulation, I always take it back to the consumer, right? Because it's the consumer that we impact, and from a marketer's perspective, you're trying to impact a consumer for a sale or a no sale, something, some type of response, some type of performance. But at the end of the day, you have an impact on who that consumer is, a positive and a negative impact. And so I think you have to go back to the consumer and understand what they're looking for, and make sure that your approach and your strategy and your communication and your outreach, it's not only relevant. We've always talked relevance and personalization, right? 30 years ago it was Peppers and Rogers, and now suddenly personalization is a revolution. How does that happen, right?
Know, it's true. It's been around the whole time.
Yeah, it has been around the whole entire time. So you have to go back really to the consumer and what the impact is on them, I think. And making sure that you're using responsible data sources, making sure that consumers understand how you're using the data. And that's not only for the marketer itself. The marketer is the one who's interacting. They're that front man with the consumer, right? But it's data providers like Acxiom, or like Oracle or other companies as well. And those are the companies that are actually sourcing that. So again, that's why the data label, I think, is really important, because it really starts to drive that communication.
So how do you see kind of the explosion of all these different tools with AI affecting not only what Acxiom does, but how marketers can better do personalization or really approach the marketplace in a different way?
I love that word, explosion. I've been seeing that a lot, but but it's such a relevant word, isn't it, for data?
Yes.
I remember 30 years ago when I was buying data, I sat down twice a year with my data broker, and we talked about my strategy and my performance goals, and we talked about the lists and the files that would assist in that, right? And then you do a mid-year check, tune up, and then you went on. Well, look at us in 2018, right? Data explosion.
Yes.
We're not just talking phone books and public records and surveys anymore, right?
Yeah.
Surveys, NDL and surveys were revolutionary, but it's exploded now. You've got web, you have browsing, you have search, you have social, you have lat longs, you have IPs, you still have name and postal, you still have email, you still have phone. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And what I see as the biggest challenge is it's not only that explosion, but the data is available through so many different places, right? I'm not just doing batch processing or automated batch processing. I'm doing real-time stuff and online stuff, and the delivery is insane. And then you have this whole group of users, right? You've got so how do you address both the breadth and the depth that a novice user needs and that an expert user needs, who's maybe a data scientist or a data analyst? How do you do that? And that's why I think it is a modern problem. We have to find automated methods and we have to find technology, because there's not enough people who are going to sit down and have that meeting. It wouldn't be 2 times a year anymore. It would be much more, right?
Almost.
So how are we going to meet that need if we don't find solutions as an industry, I think, to be able to relay the critical information, and we have a common dictionary, common terms that we use, right? You've been in the industry for a long time. I mean, I remember as I moved from name and postal to phone to email, there were all these new terminologies, but they all went back to the same stuff. The foundation of marketing and how we want to communicate with consumers is all kind of the same. It just is new technologies and new words, and it's happening so fast. It's mind-boggling to me. But things like AI and things like that will be really interesting in helping to guide people understand, particular marketers, understand what they're buying, how it applies to them, and how they can apply it to their strategies and to the use cases that they want to. So hopefully a better fit overall.
So for your own learning, how do you keep up and incorporate new technologies?
I think you have to take the time to pay attention. And I think for me, I like focus and structure. So I need to find exactly those Twitter feeds or those websites that I'm going to visit regularly where I'm getting the best information that I can. Twitter, I think, is actually great, particularly where you're looking at Adweek, or you're looking at Advertising Age or Digiday and things like that, because really then I do get that little soundbite, and that's where it's important. And then I can flag it and go back and read it when I have time. And I think events like this are really important, right? Just sitting and talking to people about what they're doing and what's coming next and what they're thinking about is really kind of fun.
Well, and I think what's kind of interesting is conferences, it feels like they're getting less attended, but I'm not so sure, because there really isn't any other place to come together, have a face-to-face conversation, and really discuss what the most important issues are for the industry.
I agree. I haven't been to a DMA conference since the early 90s, so this is my first one. I was like, a DMA conference. I really was. I was like, a DMA conference. It's fabulous.
Well, that's great.
I forgot how much fun it is to be in one place with people who really like data and like talking about data.
Yeah.
It's really, really fun. It's very invigorating. And you're right, it may not be attended as highly, but I think the people who are here, those are the people who are really going to geek out on data. And it makes for some really nice conversation. I think it's been a really nice conference. I don't know how you've seen it, but I've really enjoyed it.
All the feedback that I've gotten has been fantastic.
Yeah.
Like really good sessions, very high quality attendees.
It's kind of that small but mighty, right?
Yeah. I think so. And to your point about, these are the people who are going to be shaping some of the legislation going forward and what's happening, and hopefully shaping some of those things. And so it's kind of an interesting place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.